It is 2 o'clock, and we would like to get started. In the interest of time, we have a full agenda for today's webinar, so we will get started. For those of you who have joined us, welcome. For those of you who are still joining us, we welcome you as well. Before we get started, I'd like to call your attention to the Did You Know slide that's on the screen, because it's an important slide for a number of reasons, especially considering the topic for today's webinar. It's all about earned income possibilities, which is the topic of today's webinar. And we've shown here a number of organizations that we work with as part of Margin and Mission Ignition, just to give you all a sense for the number of possibilities that exist. This is 11 different nonprofits, and you can see they all have different earned income ventures. Everything from adult daycare services to animal behavior classes, to retail stores, to English language tutoring, folk school classes, home cleanout services, horseback riding and instruction, legal services, online stores, physical therapy services, theater performances, and venue and site rentals. These are all earned income ventures that nonprofit organizations have brought to life. And they're ideas that we'd like you to keep in mind as we move through today's webinar, especially as you start to consider what your own might be. As was the case with our previous webinar, for those of you who were with us, and for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we are big believers in social media, so we urge you to get connected if you so choose during the webinar today. If you'd like to tweet, our handles are at the Patterson Foundation and Margin_Mission. Our hashtags, which we would like you to use, are TPF Margin Mission and Earned Income. And if you would love to like us on Facebook, we would certainly appreciate it, at the Patterson Foundation and No Margin, No Mission. And for those of you who are particularly prolific at posting on social media, there may even be a prize at the end of our webinar series. We will be watching and keeping track, so please feel free to post during the webinar today or afterwards. Today's webinar, Identifying the Right Earned Income Venture for Your Nonprofit. It's a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of many. And once again, for those of you who are joining us for this call, it is the focus for today's webinar. We're delighted you're here. For those of you who have come back after webinar number 1, we certainly appreciate you being here. And for those of you, again, who are just joining our webinar series for the first time, we welcome you as well. We'd like you to consider this just as a preface for today's Earned Income webinar. When you've exhausted all the possibilities, remember this: you haven't. And from somebody who was a prolific inventor and idea person, Thomas Edison, those words couldn't ring more true. So as we launch today's webinar, it is webinar number 2 in a series of 4. And again, the topic for today is identifying the right earned income venture for your nonprofit. Just to briefly give you some context, today's webinar is part of Margin and Mission Ignition, which is an initiative of the Patterson Foundation. Many of you may be aware of Margin and Mission Ignition because we are now into almost our 5th year of the initiative. And it's designed to help nonprofits in our region increase their thrivability and be stronger as nonprofits. And we really work on 3 different areas as part of this initiative: to help nonprofits grow their entrepreneurial capacity, to help them boost their revenue, and then, of course, importantly, by doing so, to heighten their mission impact. All 3 critically important to helping to increase the thrivability of nonprofits in our region. Your presenters today, and we'd like to use baby pictures because we are youthful. My name is Michael Oxman. I'm one of the managing partners and principals in a consulting practice called No Margin, No Mission. I'm based in Chicago, and my colleague will introduce himself in a moment. and we're part of a national consulting practice that helps nonprofits all over the country become stronger through earned income.
Hi, everyone. My name is Larry Clark. I'm based in Seattle. Very happy to be here today, and I will catch up with everyone during the Q&A time.
So, No Margin, No Mission believes in the power of entrepreneurial thinking and business strategy to help nonprofits be more thrivable. That means to be financially more thrivable and to also achieve greater social impact. And that is our mantra. We work with organizations to ensure that they do that through earned income. Also joining us today, Josephine Eisenberg with Initiative Support at the Patterson Foundation. If you could direct your eyes to the chat box, Josephine will say hello to all of you. Just an item worth noting, please, that while we're sharing about earned income today, the line will be muted. That way we'll eliminate all the background noise so everybody can stay focused and really think about earned income. If you do have questions or comments today as we're going through the webinar, please note them in the chat box, because we will, when we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar today, answer as many questions and address as many comments as time allows. So again, please note comments and questions in the chat box today as we move through this webinar. Our goals for today, a few goals. We would like you to continue to gain insight into earned income. And in particular, we want to encourage entrepreneurial spirit and thinking among all of you. We want to share with you today and provide an understanding of a process. And in particular, it's a process for exploring earned income possibilities and then identifying those that are most viable for your nonprofit organization. So it's one thing to have ideas for earned income, and then it's another one to be able to understand which ideas are particularly viable for your organization. And then we want to provide you all with an opportunity to apply that thinking and the approach to your own organization. So if we can get started, one of the realities that we really like to ground ourselves in for this webinar in particular is that nonprofits typically do have a wealth of earned income possibilities, and oftentimes they just don't know it. And we believe that a nonprofit organization need to look no further than what your organization is currently giving away for free and or maybe selling at a low fee. Oftentimes, you may have programs that you assume that you have to give away for free, but they may have value beyond what you're giving them away for free. So for those of you who were on last week's first webinar, when we introduced the topic of earned income, we have a bit of a refresher, and it's just a quick one. And for those of you who are new to our webinars and just joining us for the first time, this will provide just a very, very quick primer. So we started last week's webinar by saying that without diverse revenue streams, nonprofit organizations are vulnerable. And in particular, we believe they're at risk if more than 30% of their funding is coming from a single source. So if you look to that the revenue pie and the various slices in it, having equal slices of that pie is much better than having a slice or two that are particularly large and coming from one source. We then said last week that earned income is a way to diversify revenue. And if we think about earned income and defining it, it's defined as payments that are received in direct exchange for a product or a service. Pretty simple. You've got something to sell to folks and they pay you money in exchange for it. We also said what earned income is not, and this is important. Earned income is not grants, and earned income is not donations. But it's also important to note that grants and donations are a perfectly acceptable stream of revenue for nonprofits and ones that they should continue to pursue. But by adding earned income from various activities and products or services, you're simply adding to another stream of revenue. So we said there were three types of earned income that organizations most typically look to as they're thinking about their own possibilities. The first one is products or services. Those are tangible or intangible offerings that your organization can sell to generate revenue. The second type of earned income is what we call capital. And capital are typically facilities and investments that are utilized by a nonprofit organization to generate revenue. If you own a building, if you own equipment, how might you leverage those to generate revenue for your organization? And then thirdly, intellectual assets, the skills, the knowledge, the experience of your staff that you may use to generate revenue. It may be consulting, it may be public speaking, it may be thought leadership. So we've got three types of earned income, and those are all viable opportunities for your organization to consider and pursue. So today's focus, how do you identify the right earned income venture for your nonprofit organization? Well, we do it with a process. So we want to introduce the process, which has 7 steps. And I'll briefly share those steps with you, and then we'll move into sharing a bit more detail and an example from a real organization that we've worked with. Step 1, you inventory all your earned income possibilities. Step 2 through 5 is to then take them through a bit of a prioritization process. And we'll share more with you about what this means, but we start with using some selection criteria, of which there are 6. We have a margin and mission matrix that we use to help prioritize. We then take them through a SWOT analysis and then through what we call a risk and mitigation exercise. We then move through to step number 6, and this is an if-needed step. But after you go through the first 5 steps, you actually may need more information to make an informed decision. And if you do, that's where you gather more intelligence. And then ultimately we end with step 7, which is to select what you believe is the most viable product or service to move forward with for your organization. So let's go into the individual steps and share a bit more about them. So step number 1 is inventory. What are all your nonprofit organization's earned income possibilities? They can include products, they can include services, they can include capital, they can include intellectual assets. And what we usually suggest for this first step is that you convene a group within your own organization to brainstorm and create a comprehensive list of earned income possibilities. And be sure to include your team. Bring in your leadership, bring in your staff, bring in your board members, and if there's other stakeholders that you want to involve in this process, by all means, feel free to do that. So let us share a client example with you. This is an organization that we worked with that happens to be a free clinic, and it's in Florida. And as part of the work that we did with them, they did a pretty exhaustive inventory of all the available potential offerings that they had for earned income. So as you see in yellow here, we've listed a number of them. Everything from serving as an extension of a local clinical or teaching training programs, having internships for medical, nursing, and other students, a residency program, consultation, coaching, thought leadership, replication of their clinical model, CEU courses, even an in-home physician, nurse practitioner, concierge care. If we move on to this next slide, you can see they then looked at some other earned income opportunities: diabetic kits, diabetic class and curriculum, CPR classes, medical equipment and supplies. and even community room space rental, which would fall into that category that we called capital. They also brainstormed some other earned income possibilities, things that they weren't currently offering or doing, but potentially could: catering, signature food items, cookbook, healthcare conference, an event, a symposium, or an online store. So you can see quite an exhaustive list that they went through as part of this inventory. Step number 2 was then to take that lengthy list and to start to apply some criteria so they could prioritize those earned income possibilities based on a variety of different selection criteria. And these selection criteria, of which there are 6, include the following. What do you think is the market need and demand for that particular product or service? Do you believe there is a revenue stream out there to support it? In other words, are there clients or customers who have the dollars to pay for what it is you have to offer? Can you bring this earned income offering or enterprise to market with operational ease? Or is there much complexity around it? Can you get it to market quickly, or is it going to take a long time? Again, quickly could be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, and if you look any further out, a year or two, you may say that's too long. And then, of course, what's the potential margin contribution? How much revenue do you think it has the potential to draw? And ultimately, what kind of mission contribution could you expect from this particular earned income offering? And as you're going through each of these selection criteria, we urge you to take the ideas that came up as part of your inventory and use your gut. Use what you believe to be the case based on what you know about the marketplace and what's going on out there. So if we continue our free clinic client example and we look at applying the criteria to what they believed were their top ideas, you can see down below that there are 3 of their earned income possibilities in yellow. And based on going through the selection criteria, these were the 3 that bubbled to the surface based on, again, what this organization believed it would most closely match these 6 criteria. So serving as an extension of the local clinical and teaching training programs, the internship program for medical nursing and other students, and the medical residency program. So again, you don't need to be as concerned about what products they were focusing on. It's more the process that we're trying to introduce here and encourage you to think about for your own organization. So that leads us then to the 3rd step in our process. Again, as we're trying to look at and determine the viability for these earned income possibilities. And we have what we call a margin and mission matrix. Very simple, 4 quadrants. On the top right side, the happy face, high margin, high mission. On the bottom left quadrant, the low mission, low margin. That's not where you want to be. And of course, in the other 2 quadrants, where you see that heart, that quadrant's all about mission with a relatively low contribution to margin. And then on the bottom right side, you see the low mission, high margin, which is going to contribute dollars in terms of earned income, but may not offer too much in terms of mission. So as you're thinking about your own earned income ideas and possibilities, where we really encourage you to be is in that top right quadrant. High margin, high mission, those things that are going to help really drive the revenue and the mission impact for your organization. When we talk about this matrix, then, what we encourage you to do is to plot the top earned income possibilities within the matrix itself. And as I said before, the goal should be to maximize margin and mission whenever it's possible. So again, as we look to the client example, our free and charitable clinic example, when they took their key ideas and plotted them in this matrix, what they saw was that the three that I have shared on previous slides had shown up or been plotted in the high margin, high mission quadrant, and then there were two others that were plotted in other quadrants with their diabetic kits, for example, offering high mission but low margin, and then down in the bottom lower right quadrant, their community room rental space offering low mission and high margin. But in the end, this is where they want to be, in that upper right quadrant, high margin, high mission. So once we've gone through the margin and mission matrix, we then go to step number 4, which is our SWOT analysis. And for those of your organizations who are familiar with SWOT, that's great. If you're not, it's essentially using a tool to really look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that would help you assess your most viable earned income possibilities. And again, just to remind everybody, if you do have any questions as we're moving through, please note your questions or comments in the chat box, and we will come back to them as we get to the Q&A portion of this webinar. So in terms of our SWOT analysis, again, carrying our client example through to this step, the free and charitable clinics, as they looked at one example of a product that they took through this SWOT, which was serving as an extension of local and clinical teaching and training programs, they then said, well, what are the strengths of that as an earned income offering? Everything from hands-on patients to there's a real need that exists in our marketplace. We have an existing curriculum. We have passionate staff and expertise. We believe there's potential for funding, and so on and so forth. They then went on to look at the weaknesses of that as a particular earned income possibility. And they said, well, we have a small staff. We have no startup capital currently to launch this and get it off the ground. There's a maybe limited student capacity, don't know. And we're not sure that there's easy mass transit access among some of the other weaknesses that they identified. They then took it to look at opportunities for that particular earned income possibility. Opportunities, as they looked externally and specifically said, well, it's an opportunity for revenue generation. It's an opportunity to bring more offerings for our patients. It's an opportunity for new equipment and supplies to grow our patient base, for increased awareness and visibility, and for increased funding opportunities, again, among several other opportunities that they identified. And then they came to threats. So again, looking at their particular earned income possibility to say what might those threats be out there that could put us in jeopardy as an earned income offering. Everything from healthcare and legislation changes to competition, potentially a pushback on fee structure. What if they can't execute properly? And of course, liability could be a threat. So we then move on to step number 5, which really builds from the SWOT analysis, and it's what we called our risk and mitigation exercise. And what's important is that after you've done the SWOT analysis on your top earned income possibilities, it's a good idea to go through and identify the most significant risks that you believe would result for this earned income possibility based on those weaknesses and threats that you identified in the SWOT analysis. So in particular, what are the greatest risks and how might you mitigate them? So as we take our client example, the free clinic, looking again at their extension of local clinical teaching and training programs, what are the greatest risks for that as an earned income possibility? Well, small staff. No startup funding, competition, pushback on fee, and may not be able to execute properly. So thinking through the biggest risks and then importantly looking at how this organization would mitigate those risks. Because again, what matters is that you can mitigate the risks. If you can't, you may say, we're not even going to pursue this idea. So, small staff, how you mitigate it. You hire a skilled staffer to manage the venture. No startup funding. You seek funding partners to provide the seed capital that you need to launch. Competition. Well, maybe you partner with other free clinics, expanded hours, increase visibility and awareness. Push back on fee. Well, having a clear value proposition is one way to help address that. And can't execute properly. Well, by being flexible, nimble, evaluating and course correcting, and maybe even having a 6-month pilot are potentially good ways to mitigate those risks. So that takes us to step number 6. So for any organization that's gone through these first 5 steps, it may be apparent to them that they've got a really good, viable earned income opportunity. But it may also become apparent to them that they need more information to assess the earned income possibility or possibilities. And the way to do that is to do some secondary research, to do some primary research, and or to do some other information gathering. And any or all of those is perfectly acceptable if it's felt that you have a gap in your information and you need more. But ultimately, the goal is to get to step number 7 through this process, which is to select an earned income idea that rose to the top through this assessment process. And that's when we say, is there one earned income opportunity that is clearly most viable? And for our free clinic example, it was this particular one shown in yellow that we've been following through, which was to launch and create a earned income venture that essentially served as an extension of local clinical teaching and training programs within their area. So just to recap this process, so everybody has a sense. It's a 7-step process. Again, this is for really identifying earned income possibilities, which you start by doing an inventory of all those potential products and services that you could launch as an earned income venture, then taking them through a process to prioritize by using a set of selection criteria, by using our margin and mission matrix, our SWOT analysis, and our risk and mitigation exercise, and then ultimately, if it's needed, in step 6, to gather more intel through various methods, and then landing with step 7 on your most viable product or service. So we urge all of you to take some action based on this process that we've shared today. Nobody likes to have homework, but if you feel so inclined and would like to, we certainly would encourage you to share this learning today with others in your organization, convene a group internally to inventory your own organization's earned income possibilities, and then apply this process that we shared with you to assess their viability. And we do believe it's a good way to take the information from today and to start the process of really understanding what your own earned income possibilities may be. And remember, organizations that are most successful at earned income typically have a strong and viable product or service offering. It really, truly does start with that. And from there, we believe then that you have a key ingredient for success, which of course, when you add other ingredients like having the desire to dedicate time and energy and resources to bringing an earned income venture to life, is critical for your leadership, for your board, and for your staff all to be involved. And then having the organizational preparedness to do that. And those are topics for our next earned income webinars, which are coming up on March 20th and March 27th. So we urge you to stay tuned. Now, what we'd like to do is go to your questions, which you've shared in the chat box or comments, which just in a moment I will turn over to Larry. But we would like you to just note that we do have some important information to share before we wrap. So please hang in with us as we move through the Q&A portion of this webinar to our closing in a few minutes. So Larry, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Mike. There is a question already from Krista. And let me read the question to you just in case you can't see it. MPOs are known for being collaborative and transparent. When conducting best practices research, number 6, which is in the list that Mike just shared, how do we do that while also being protective of our potential IP in the marketplace? First of all, that's a really good question. And maybe I'll approach it a couple of different ways. One being, you might already have the product or the service that you're delivering in the marketplace, and so you know who your competition is, you know who you might be competing against. So that's a decision-making process you need to go through to decide, is this worthwhile to take forward or not? You've probably already done some research around that. Probably some of that best practices research would be around pricing of it, if you're going to take that product or service and actually attach a price or higher price to it. I think another way to think about it is it's okay to let others know that you're developing a business plan. In fact, what we have found is that you're well respected in the community from the foundation perspective and also from other nonprofits, knowing that you're taking more of a business approach to a product or a service that you're taking to market. So I think there's a bit of respect that goes along with that. But if it really comes down to being protective, you might just need to be protective of it if it's a great idea and you think somebody else might be taking it. Those are maybe 3 thoughts. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. I think that was a good response to the question.
Other questions? We'll just wait a second. Maybe somebody's typing. Maybe I'll ask a question. Does anyone have a product or a service that they're currently giving away that they could turn into an intellectual property that they could sell? If you could just type it in. People are being shy today, I think. There's one. Connie just said, I'm trying to determine what it is we could sell, which is exactly the process that Mike just took you through, Connie. So hopefully you learned a little bit today that will help you in that decision-making process, and we'll stick with us. Mike, how about if I turn it back over to you?
Okay, let's wrap.
Wait a second. There might be another question. I'm sorry. Kathleen just said, one comes to mind, it could be public speaking and training. Sandra just says, give too much info to larger organizations about how to deal with the working poor and the risk families and children. So you give away too much information to larger organizations, it sounds like. So all of those could turn into some type of an earned income strategy, but the questions that you're asking right now are kind of how do you make those decisions, and we really encourage you to walk through that process that Mike shared with you today. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
So just as we begin to close, today's webinar has been recorded, and a link will be available soon on the Patterson Foundation website. Again, we encourage you to feel free to share the webinar link with your colleagues and peers if you so choose. We would like to thank everybody for joining us. We certainly appreciate your participation, and we hope you will join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, March 20th, where we'll talk about 5 important factors to consider for an earned income venture. This will be an important webinar and one that will provide some good insight, because it's those things that we believe make for a successful earned income venture. Again, for those of you who would like to invite your colleagues and peers to register for our webinar next week and the one on the 27th, we certainly encourage you to do so. They can use the link that either you currently have or that the Patterson Foundation will be sending in a subsequent email. We also want to provide a bit of a sneak peek to what's ahead, and we certainly invite all of you to continue with us on our earned income journey. Many of you may know Margin and Mission Ignition as an initiative. We have been around for 4.5, almost 5 years, working with a number of nonprofits in the region, and we obviously will continue to do that as we move through our webinar series, which will continue through March, and then we launch our educational lab series, which will begin in April. And while the webinars are really considered to be a primer, a thought starter, where we're just sharing the basics about earned income, the educational lab series, which will actually take place on site in a venue, will invite you to really dive deeper into the topic of earned income through a series of labs and really give you the opportunity to work as an organization and a team and begin exploring in more detail what your earned income opportunities may be, to consider your organizational preparedness for earned income, and to provide some real-life examples and case studies so that you're able to borrow from and learn from those. That then would lead to a process for your organization to potentially participate in an intensive one-on-one consultation and technical assistance phase of our initiative, which would include business planning, business plan implementation, and then post-implementation monitoring and tracking. A much more intensive process than the webinars and the labs, and we will have a process that we'll share more about as we continue to move through this series. But why that's important is because with our first lab rapidly approaching in April, we wanted to give you all a heads up. That lab, we urge you to at least put on your calendar, save the date. You're going to receive a formal invitation from the Patterson Foundation, but it will be about why nonprofits should care about earned income on Tuesday, April 10th. It's a half day from 9 until 1. Lunch will be provided, and the location is still to be announced. If you are going to consider joining us for that first lab, we strongly encourage participation by at least 3 members of your organization: your executive director, CEO, a board member, could be a board chair or another board member who has an active interest in earned income, and then a key staff member. So again, save the date, put it on your calendar, and be on the lookout for the invitation that will be coming via email from the Patterson Foundation. And once again, back to these youthful-looking characters, please feel free to contact myself or Larry. Our email addresses are provided here. Jot them down if you would like. L. Clark at NoMarginNoMission.org and M. Oxman at NoMarginNoMission.org. So with that, we will wrap webinar number 2. We will again say thank you to all of you for joining us for today's session. And again, we do urge you to join us next week for webinar number 3. Are there any questions before we wrap? Anything in the chat box, Larry?
Nope, just some thank yous.
Okay, well, thanks to all of you, and we will speak with you again next week. Take care and goodbye.